The first quarter of this year, the central banks bought more gold than at any time ever in history over the first quarter of a year, ever. And they claim they bought 16 tons. However, the World Gold Council came out and said, you're all lying bastards. It's actually 15 times that amount you guys bought. I think that I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into the conventional wisdom that we are seeing, like selling what's liquid first explanation as to, why during, these periods of uncertainty, that's one of the first things that we always see is that, they sold what was liquid. That's why the price went down, even though, inflation, rising inflation and war and uncertainty would be typically good for gold and silver.
Right.
It's a convenient narrative, but it doesn't hold up to me, Jordan, because we see the same pattern repeating over and over and over and over again. You can't use the same excuse over and over and over again. Truth of the matter is silver's price in the short term is set in the futures market. And it's not by the people taking delivery of physical metal. Like, for example, the first 3 months of this year, first quarter, China took possession of more silver than at any time in the history of the country, ever. And that was as the price was getting kneecapped. You look on COMEX in February, 26 million ounces of silver were delivered to COMEX in February, yet 39 million ounces, or 160% of what deliveries could explain alone, left COMEX. 2.9 million pounds of silver got on trucks and drove away. Who's running the logistics for that? I think the truth of it is that they're two very different markets, that being the paper market and the physical market. And it just seems that when geopolitical headlines hit, like we see now, the algorithms that run the macro funds, trade via the supposed expectations about central bank policy. Oh, there's war and inflation's going to get higher, so they're going to raise rates, or they're certainly not going to lower. We evidently are conditioned to believe that you have to have a Fed that is accommodating and lowering rates in order for metals to do well. This narrative overwhelms the safe haven status.
Yeah.
And I guess I would say the paper market reacts first, the physical buyers react. But, when we are seeing the amount of interest in silver globally, like in places like China, and whoever is standing for delivery here in the United States, I think it bears mentioning. Now, there are people out there that will dismiss the massive deliveries we've seen on COMEX, right? So let's define things for a moment. Less than 1% of contracts ever stood for delivery my entire career. COMEX was designed to offset risk. A company like mine is never going to take delivery. We use it to offset the risk of our inventory. A company like First Majestic is never going to take delivery. They're shorting to offset the risk of production that's coming online that they're going to, ultimately get paid for, but they're happy with the price, so they'll forward sell their production price they're happy with. It's to offset the risk. A farmer who's growing wheat will forward sell wheat futures to offset the risk of the growing season. It's used to balance risk.
Here's the thing about COMEX futures. Historically, fewer than 1% ever turned into actual delivered metal. Most traders were just hedging, not stacking bars in a vault somewhere, but that pattern's been breaking down. By February 2026, COMEX registered silver inventories had dropped to around 86 million ounces. That's a 64% decline from April 2020's 240 million ounces. At the same time, China's silver imports hit roughly 1,626 tons in the first quarter of 2026, the biggest quarterly inflow ever recorded. China went from net exporter to aggressive net importer in a single quarter. Somebody, somewhere, is choosing to take delivery instead of settling on paper, and doing it at a scale we haven't really seen before.
And there's only one entity that I could see that would be accumulating like 14 billion in gold in June, stood for delivery, almost 20 billion in February, gold. Who's spending this kind of money to stand for delivery? Why go to the effort instead of just paper settling, rolling forward or exiting, standing for delivery? Way outsized delivery requests than anything we've ever seen before. But that gold, a lot of it left, but more of it stays. Now, you know, silver was made a critical mineral. That's for national security, right?
Yeah.
And you look at Secretary Bessent, he understands gold very well. I don't know if you watched him on Jesse Waters the other night, walking through the Treasury and talking about gold and how when Nixon closed the gold window, it became fiat. I mean, it'd be like the three of us having a conversation. He'd understand everything we're talking about. He is a gold bug, self-proclaimed. Awesome. When he ran Soros's hedge fund, it was the largest holding, right? So who could stand for delivery under the auspice of national security, therefore not needing congressional approval, and who would have zero trepidation whatsoever of leaving their earmarked gold and silver, of which it's 9 to 10 figures every single month for 18 months without worrying of any shenanigans,
right,
if you will. And if it were the U.S. Treasury that was doing this under the Exchange Stabilization Fund, they would not need congressional approval if it were earmarked for national security. So I ask myself, who could be standing for delivery, leaving the majority of it within the COMEX ecosystem, which would be within a Brinks or a Loomis vault held by a proxy entity like JP Morgan or Citi or Bank of America, where they would say something like, listen, you know, there's a race globally for metals. We understand that. There are no free markets anymore, just manipulations as a side note to all of this. What if they knock down the price to stand for delivery quietly using proxy entities, and instead of pulling it all off the exchange as everyone thinks they should, if they did that, they would cut off their nose to spite their face. Everyone would say, holy shit, the COMEX is draining. We better do something about that. Instead, they stand for delivery, they leave it within the ecosystem and say, that's ours. We'll get it when we need it. Now, this is speculation. What I do believe is that the biggest money in the world, and you know where I'm going with this about misdirection.
Yeah.
Price is the ultimate tool of misdirection. Yeah. And if price was really indicative of value, then why are we seeing the kind of deliveries we are? And when you're spending 9 and 10 figures, that would be anywhere from up to 10 billion or more. Nine figures, you know, like 1 through 9 billion, 10 billion or more. You're getting up into 10 figures every single month. Who spent 20 billion in February on gold? Who spent 14 billion here in June on gold? Who took possession of 39 million ounces of silver at $70 an ounce? Why is China buying more silver in the first 3 months of the year and roughly 50 or 60 billion dollars worth of gold for the first 3 months of the year as the price was getting destroyed? Price is tool misdirection. Now, as it pertains to COMEX, I say, look, I don't know who's doing it, but if I had to guess, to me, it's as good of a guess as any. Who could leave it there and not worry about the issues on COMEX? Right. Well, to me, it just reeks of the Treasury.
Now, some people in the industry take it a step further with a theory that's provocative and completely unverified, that some of this unusual COMEX delivery activity isn't private traders at all, but a sovereign entity quietly buying metal through proxy banks and just leaving the bars sitting in exchange vaults instead of hauling them out. To be clear, that's speculation, not fact. Nobody's produced evidence to back it up. What is documented is just how strange the scale has gotten. 9 and 10 figure sums moving through gold and silver delivery every month in 2026, well beyond anything we've seen historically in exchange settlement.
So less than 1% of contracts ever stood for delivery. Typically, they would either roll forward to the next month, they would cash settle, or they would just exit the position. Less than 1%, and now we're seeing massive deliveries. Now, people will say that's true. The run-up in silver and gold through the first quarter in inventory on COMEX was the tariff risk, and a lot of it bled down. A lot did leave, right? But minus that, we're still relatively constant in terms of where we were before. All true. So some did leave. Some went to China as they're buying it hand over fist, as we've seen for almost a year now, roughly a 12 or 13% arbitrage where they're pricing silver in Shanghai at $10, $11, $12 an ounce over the Western price. They do that to entice the trader who will sell them 10 million ounces for delivery in Hong Kong, which is a Brinks contract, full delivery exchange for physical to Brinks Hong Kong. A truck picks it up, drives it to Shanghai. Make the trader for JP Morgan $110 million, $120 million on that one trade, and he's off to buy a new yacht. But what we're really seeing is an overt demand to take delivery instead of paper settling. Now, delivery doesn't mean it has to leave COMEX, right? It can stay within the COMEX ecosystem to where there are two categories. There is registered. Those are the bars that back the contracts. There's eligible. Eligible is the opposite category. Those are bars that are eligible to be registered, but they're not. Now, Miles Franklin has 9 Brinks facilities throughout North America. One is a COMEX facility, New York. I have one lady with 2 million ounces in 1,000-ounce bars. You and I have talked about her before. She has no intention of selling. Those 1,000-ounce silver bars are in the eligible category, right?
Well, remember, for the first time since I think the 60s, gold surpassed U.S. Treasuries as the #1 reserve asset, which is crazy.
Well, and you know what's funny about that too, Jordan? I agree with you, right? And those are from official statistics, right?
Yeah.
So, in first quarter of this, yes, official, that's right, quote unquote. The first quarter of this year, the central banks bought more gold than at any time ever in history over the first quarter of a year, ever. And they claim they bought 16 tons. However, the World Gold Council came out and said, you're all lying bastards. It's actually 15 times that amount. You guys bought 240 tons. So what I'm saying is, they're going out of their way to misdirect, including the central banks, who are misdirecting how much they're buying by a factor of 15 that we know of. Now, if the People's Liberation Army buys gold on behalf of China, they have no obligation, and it is voluntary, to report. If the PBOC does it, they're supposed to, according to the voluntary rules. We know that the first quarter, which was the biggest ever, they were only off by a small factor of 15, from 16 tons to 240. So it makes you wonder, how much of all of this information are they hiding? And if you were moving to a system that was more reliant upon commodities, or whatever trade it is that you're trying to quietly maximize, the last thing you want to do is let everyone know what you're doing in a world where information is like that. So could it be? I don't know. I'm just saying, to me, it would be one explanation for who's standing for delivery and leaving a good chunk of it on COMEX. But I will tell you that, look, it's been a rough couple of months right now for the gold and silver price. But what's really changed? To me, nothing's changed. And if you believe the Silver Institute's data that we're in the 6th straight year of structural deficits, then I'd ask the simple question: how long can demand exceed supply before prices finally reflect it?
Yeah.
And Keith Neumeyer is right. And he just recently said silver is one of the few commodities where the paper market sets the short-term price. Or what he said was, being a silver producer, it's one of the only businesses where they don't get to set their own price. It's set by the futures price. And the futures traders move the price today, and they're good at it. But ultimately, like looking at the supply-demand numbers that are going on 6 years of a structural deficit, at some point that physical availability must determine it over time. And maybe that's why the central banks are buying it, and, like China, and whoever's doing it here, and Russia, and India, and, big purchases that are more or less inelastic. In other words, they're buying it no matter what the price is doing, up or down. They don't care about the CPI numbers or the employment numbers or any of that stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting time. That's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. And I mean, the bottom line is, to me, sovereign buyers are accumulating hard assets. And with silver being a monetary and a critical industrial metal, I don't know, it's kind of a powerful combination. And could it stay frustrating longer? Yeah. But, you know, there's the old saying, markets exist to wear people out before they pay them. So, I don't know, if your conviction was based on structural supply deficits and the shift towards physical price discovery, which we're seeing now in China, I'd argue that the thesis is stronger today than it's ever been. And you're beginning to see that. You're beginning to see, for once, the system be challenged, whether it be through deliveries or now with the new exchange that just came about in Hong Kong and similarly in Abu Dhabi, where you are getting same-day settlement tied directly to delivery, where price and delivery are going to sync up. In other words, price discovery becomes far more of a reality. And so too does, I think, lessening of volatility. You got to be an idiot, as dumb as a mud wall, to naked short Western metals when you have a growing legitimate exchange in China that will pay for immediate delivery, where the price and the delivery match up, rather than, yeah, we'll sell you a future, 60, 90 days out or whatever, where the ability for companies or entities, rather, that are non-hedging entities, they're just doing it to speculate, can control the price. It's the tail wagging the dog, proverbially, the proverbial tail wagging the dog, like, the futures price controlling the metals price rather than the metals price controlling the futures price.
Right.
Even the official central bank gold numbers might be understating things. Some analysts have flagged World Gold Council estimates showing first quarter 2026 central bank purchases running way higher than what countries initially reported. Part of that gap seems to trace back to places like China, where military gold buying doesn't fall under the same voluntary disclosure rules as regular central bank purchases. If that's accurate, it means the official statistics have been chronically underselling real sovereign demand. Stack that on top of record Chinese silver imports and 6 straight years of structural silver deficits, and you start to see a picture where physical scarcity is quietly running ahead of what the public data even shows.